Okay, I think we're ready to go. And as people join us, welcome, Jonathan. I think this is one of your first ALI visits, and I'm so glad you're joining us today. Thank you. All right, take it away, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Mark Tilchin. Good morning. Thank you all of you for being here. Today is really the fourth segment of a four-piece presentation that I've done over the last couple of months. Today is also Yom Hazikaron, the Memorial Day for soldiers, Israeli soldiers, and victims of terror. So Rabbi Tilchin and I were thinking we can combine some of those elements. We started at the very beginning from the very first Jew, Abraham and Sarah, and went about 4,000 in the first three segments until the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, which will be celebrated starting tonight. And today, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the State of Israel, some of my personal experiences, and some of the things that I experienced through my father or through friends and so forth. Our sages teach that saving one life, one Jewish life, is if you save the entire world. That basically means that in Judaism, life is the entire world and of infinite value. This is very different than some religion that glorify death. We in Judaism hold life as the highest value. And because of that, the untimely death of any Israeli soldiers or civilian in a terror attack is felt by the entire country. It's sad. Since the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, was established on May 26, 1948, many soldiers gave their life in defense of the country. Many civilians were also killed in terror attack. Chaim Weizmann, that later became the first president of Israel, it's a rather ceremonial title held in Israel. The prime minister is similar to our president, the leader of the government. Chaim Weizmann said that a state, a country, is not handed to the people on a silver platter. That is to say, there is a really high cost to pay for having a country. So both the creation of the state of Israel and the survival of the state of Israel has cost many lives, many soldiers and many civilians victim of terrors. Israel is very unique. It's the only state, the only country in the world that I've known, that I know of, and I've researched it, that observed a Memorial Day for the soldiers and victim of terror immediately before Independence Day. I've spoken before about the honey and the sting. Some of the things that are good come because of some of the things that are not so good. And today, because I'm going to talk about some personal experiences, and I have to tell you, it's not easy for me, and it's mostly not stuff that I've done in the past. I think it's very important that you'll understand it is not about me. I'm just a small link, and I share some experiences uh, with you from my early years. Today is about the Israeli soldiers and the victim of terrors, clearly not with us anymore. You could see that I'm alive. As of Thursday, this past Thursday, May 9th, the Israeli Defense Forces listed 25,034 lives, soldiers and civilians. About 24,000 of them are soldiers, 5,100 of them are civilian, and 782 of them are children that were killed in terror attack. There were also 203 non-Israeli citizens, tourists essentially, that were killed in terror attack. Just to put it in perspective, In 1948, during the Independence War of 1948, about 600,000 Jews lived in the state of Israel. 6,373 of them, men and women, gave their life in that war. That's more than 1% of the entire population of the state of Israel at the time. So it's really not easy to talk about war. I found over the years that it's best to let it lay in the weeds, not bring it up. Why bring it up? Why wake up the demons? Why talk about things that are not necessarily comfortable? About 17 years ago, during a presentation at Congregation B'nai Israel in Tustin, I broke that rule. I spoke on a small part of an experience that I had. And today I'm going to break that rule again. I'm going to speak about another part, again, a small part of personal experience that I experienced during service in the Israeli Defense Forces. But first, I want to start with my first experience of war as a child. I was 6 years old when the Six-Day War started, 1967. At the time, we lived very close to pre-1967 border, so we lived very close to the border with Jordan. In fact, we could see on occasion the explosions of bomb because of the clouds they created on the mountains and the hill close to our home. And so when the Six-Day War started, immediately our fathers were taken into service. My dad was in the military anyway. He made a career out of military. He served 37 years in the military. So he was already gone. And the mothers, most of them youngs in their late 20s and early 30s that lived in my building, took all of us to the bomb shelter. After several days, when it was kind of clear that Israel is winning and winning big in 1967, the mothers took us out of the bomb shelter and told us to sit out on this step. I literally can see it right now, as if it's happening right now. They told us to sit on this step, maybe 10 feet away from the opening, the door to the bomb shelter. And they stood a few feet away, talking between them, listening to transistor radio for news. But we were 6, and my friend was 5, and another friend was 6, and another friend was 7. It was all fun and game for us. So I remember how, because it was dark and they couldn't quite see us very well, nobody was allowed to turn on light, because when you turn on light, you become a target. We made the sound of a siren, the same siren that is heard throughout Israel when bombs or rockets are shot at Israel. We were 5 and 6 and 7. I remember how the mothers just jumped out of their skin and started running toward us to take us when they realized it was us making that sound. They were not happy about it. They made sure that we knew they were not happy about it. I have a very interesting memory from that war. Literally, as soon as the war was over and my dad fought in Jerusalem in 1967, my dad, as a young officer, sent someone to bring my mom and me to see him in Jerusalem. And I remember on the drive over there, we saw a bunch of armored vehicles that were on fire, Jordanians. And then we eventually got to where my dad was stationed temporarily in a school, and immediately took us to the Western Wall. It was the first time when paratroopers liberated old city of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, and that Jews can go there since 1948. And I remember standing there with my mom on one hand and my dad on the other. It wasn't until about a month later did the Israeli rabbinate designated the Western Wall a synagogue, therefore a mechitza had to be erected. During that time, right after the war, it was just the Western Wall. And I remember that my mom and dad were standing on both sides of me, praying. And I was just standing there looking at people. The Western Wall, as you know it today, was not the Western Wall I remember from 67. There were a bunch of shops and there was a stable, and it was a very narrow road, maybe 15 or 20 feet. This is in the eye of a 6-year-old. And it was also very short. The way we see it today, a lot of those buildings and shops were leveled, and a lot of the Western Wall was excavated to the point that it shows it to be very tall. Just to put it in perspective, on the right side of the Western Wall, or on the left side of Robinson Arch, if you've been to the Western Wall or if you look online, you'll see a bridge leading to a doorway almost near the top. That doorway was street level. This is how much was dug down by Israeli archaeologists. And this is why they need a bridge right now to reach that high point. The next war that I experienced was the 1973 Yom Kippur War. I was 12. My experience was very different from being a 12-year-old. Even today, lacking the wisdom of a psychologist, I cannot tell you the kind of impact the event I'm about to tell you had on me. I'm sure it had more than what I think it had on me. There's one thing for sure that I know, how this war impacted me, at least how my experience from this war impacted me. And I want to tell you a little bit about it. But first, I want to tell you how this all started for me. It was Friday, Erev Yom Kippur. My dad, because he was in the military, was very late to come home. No cell phones back there. My mom couldn't reach him. When she called the base, they say he's out in the field. My two brothers, my sister, and my mom, we already taken our showers, put on the white clothes for Yom Kippur. We're waiting for our dad to come home so we can eat the meal before the fast begins. It was very late when my dad actually got home. He immediately ran to the shower. He came back out of the shower. I remember some water still kind of dripping because he didn't even dry himself properly. He was buttoning the shirt as we were sitting down to eat. And then my parents started speaking between them. They spoke French between them, a language that my sister and I knew, but my two younger brothers didn't. And one word in French kept coming up again and again: la guerre, war. When we went to the synagogue, my dad asked me, I was 12, and my 8-year-old brother to take turns standing by the door and let him know if the Jeep comes. The Jeep would mean somebody came to pick him up. This was Friday, Yom Kippur Eve, Kol Nidre. Fast forward the next day, Saturday, Yom Kippur, about 10 o'clock in the morning. I came back from my shift at the door, and my brother went. And it wasn't but a few minutes. And my brother came back in. And just as I was about to say to him, it hasn't been 20 minutes, he said, the Jeep is outside. My dad knew what that meant. His demeanor changed in an instant. He dropped down on one knee and he hugged the three of us. My 4-year-old brother Yossi said, Koevli, you're hurting me. My dad did not let go. He was holding us for just a few seconds, but it really seemed a lot longer. And then he got up on his feet. He grabbed me by my shoulders. And for the very first time in my life, he gave me a military command. He said, take your brothers home and tell mom there's a war. And with that, he turned around and he started running toward the door. I remember standing there just for an instant and watching his talit flowing behind him as if he was wearing a cape. I took my 4-year-old brother's hand in my right hand and my 8-year-old brother in my left hand, and we quickly moved through the aisle to the door. The doorway was about 5 steps above the street. So when we stood at the door, we could see our dad just arriving at the Jeep that was parked maybe 60 yards, 50 yards away. In those days, nobody drove on Yom Kippur. To a great extent, nobody drives on Yom Kippur today. But back then, nobody drove on Yom Kippur. And as we stood at the doorway, I saw my dad get into the Jeep. He still had his talit on. He reached for the radio, that walkie-talkie like, and he started talking into it. I don't know what he was saying. It was too far. And then he raised his head up and he saw us. And he saw that we see him. On my right, my brother waved to him. And on my left, my other brother waved to him. I didn't wave because I was holding their hands. My dad didn't wave, didn't smile. He just looked at us. Really deep look. And then the Jeep started rolling. And I remember as the Jeep was rolling, my dad's gaze followed us. And then the Jeep turned the corner. And we haven't seen my dad for about 2.5 months. I tightened the grip around my brother's hands. We came down those few steps and we started running home. We lived, I don't know, maybe 200 yards away from the synagogue. I don't even remember how my 4-year-old brother was able to run it, but he ran it. I held his hand and I was not going to let go. Then we got to the home, and on my left, Iggy knocked on the door, my 8-year-old brother. My mom opened the door. She had that surprised look on her face. And before she could say anything, I told her what my dad asked me to say. As if the two of them rehearsed it before. My mom also dropped on one knee and also hugged the three of us. And once again, my 4-year-old brother said, "You're hurting me." My mom let go right away. She touched him on the cheek, probably in a way that only a mother can comfort a child. And she said, "Ze beseder, Hamudi. It's okay, my dear." She told us to go to the kitchen to drink water on Yom Kippur, and then to bring our pillow and blankets to the bomb shelter under the building. We started walking toward the kitchen when my mom called my name. I stopped. My brother stopped. I turned my head around to look at her, and she said, "Let them go." I was still holding my brother's hands. And that was the moment I realized I am my brother's keeper. So when I told you I don't know what kind of impact that event had on my life, one thing I do know, it made me my brother's keeper. I'm not just talking about my two brothers. I'm talking about my people, the people of Israel. When I finished high school, I was in a school for sciences and electronics. And most of my classmates did what's called atuda. They went into getting an advanced degree with the understanding that when they finish their college degree, they will join the Israeli Defense Forces and serve as engineers. Almost all of them went into electronics. I was not interested in electronics. I was interested in aerospace. So doing that was not part of my calculation. But I knew that as soon as I'm done with the matriculation exam, the last matriculation exam at the end of high school, the next day I'm going into the military. And it was very clear to me from the very beginning that it has to be an infantry unit, preferably the paratrooper. I don't know what it is now with the IDF, but I can tell you that when I was 18, going through basic training, parachuting training, specialty training, etc., there was great training, skill training that was very good and very useful in battle, in combat, in war. But there was no emotional training. I don't know if you can do emotional training. Things happen in war, things happen in battle. How do you train people, 18, 19-year-old, to deal with a death of a friend that just spoke to you a few seconds ago? How do you train someone, an emotional kind of training, to deal with a mortally wounded friend? How do you train soldiers to deal with the lifeless body of a terrorist or an enemy that you just killed? I don't know if there is such a training. Certainly, I know that I did not get that kind of a training. But I do know that in an instant, it came upon me unexpectedly. And I want to tell you a little bit about that story. It's really just a part of a story that I've never spoken about. At the end of that event, there was debriefing by Israeli intelligence, and then we said everything because it's part of the debriefing. And I've not really spoken about it since, at least the part I'm about to tell you about. I was 19 and a half when that instant that I was talking about happened to me. My unit was stationed against the border with Lebanon, and an intelligence report came. There's an imminent attack. The 11 terrorists are at a very specific house that's about 2 kilometers from the border. I would say that's something like 1.3, 1.4, 1.3 miles away from the border. Today, with advanced technology, they probably will put a drone or two up into the air and wait for them to leave the house and then blow into Kingdom Come with a Hellfire missile. But this is not today. This is something that happened more than 40 years ago. So since we were the closest infantry unit and it was imminent, we were really put together very quick. We crossed the border on foot and we headed toward that house. We were standing in the grove, maybe 100 feet from the house. There was a clearing of about 100 feet and we were in the grove. We separated into 3 teams of 3 soldiers each. The medics and the backup stayed in the grove. The signal was given, and we came running from 3 different directions. I was on the left. I was the second of the 3. My friend Eitan was in front of me. Another friend was behind. And as we started running, the assault began. Halfway through that open clearing, there was a burst of fire, and Eitan fell down right in front of me. So I screamed. Eitan was hit, left side, so the medic will hear me. I didn't stop. Once an assault begins, there is no stopping. My focus was the source of that fire and completing the mission at hand. Maybe 30 seconds later, 40 seconds later, it was over. They were all dead. And I ran out of the house back to the spot where Eitan fell. The medic already dragged him into the grove, and he was struggling to put morphine or IV line into him, and at the same time holding a bandage on his neck. So I took the bandage and I held it while the medic was working on the other part. I was 19. I was telling him, we got them all, we killed them all, we're going to be okay. And And he was breathing so heavily. He was bleeding from the neck, and I didn't know what to say. So I was saying just things. The adrenaline was still running. Um, and then the medic said, Umet, he died. And just like that, in an instant, everything kind of collapsed. All those emotions that I spoke about that happened during Bada just kind of collapsed. I mean, it's like, what do you do? How do you deal with this? I remember just before he died that his eyes were really wide open, looking at me. It wasn't saying everything. He was just breathing very heavy. And I don't know if he was in shock or what was going on. I didn't have that kind. I still don't have that kind of medical training to know what exactly happened at that moment, except for he was bleeding and he was just shot. And the officer arrived and he said, pick him up. And I picked him up on my shoulder. We still had to go back about 1.3 or so miles back to the border. And I remember that because he was on my shoulder and he was still bleeding, his blood was coming down behind my Kevlar, and I could feel the warm blood, especially because it was kind of misty, drizzling kind of a night, not quite raining, but it was really misty and drizzling, and I could feel that warm blood between the Kevlar and my shirt and my body. Um, um, this is why I said sometimes it's better to let those memories behind and not bring them up. But a day like today, when we honor so many that gave their lives, um, and I really told you just a portion of what happened. It's funny, I took an oath at the end of my military service not to talk about the specifics of the military service. And for most part, I kind of stayed true to it. Um, I didn't have to take an oath for reserve duty, but during the military service and at the end of certain activities, and um, but every now and then, not often, they just kind of bubble up to the surface, and I think about some of those things, and sometimes I wonder the what if, and if only this happened, if that happened, and we can't. I mean, we can go back and change the course of history. Um, I don't know how this event impacted me, um, but at least I was adult. I was 19 and a half or so at the time. I was not a 12-year-old, as it was during the Yom Kippur War. Um, at the end of my military service, like most Israelis, I took a backpack and a sleeping bag, and I traveled across North America and Canada. Um, in those days, Israel did not have the kind of diplomatic relations Israel has now with Eastern European countries or Southeast Asia or some of the South American country. Today, um, most young Israelis that do it are very fortunate to be able to go to Southeast Asia or South America or Eastern European country, as well as the only places I could have gone, Western Europe or North America. The plan for me was to backpack and travel for 6 months. Um, at the same time that I was going to North America, I was also checking out schools for aerospace. Aerospace was not available in Israel in the early 80s. Of course, it is now. Israel has satellites and rockets that travel through space, etc. But in the early 80s, that was not the case. The closest I could get to it was aeronautical engineering at the Technion Institute in Haifa. It's the equivalent of the MIT in Massachusetts. But I was not interested in aeronautical engineering. I wanted aerospace. And so I knew that now that I finished the military service, I will have to go study somewhere. And so I was checking out schools. The plan was to be backpacking for 6 months. But about 4 months or so into the backpacking trip and checking out school, the war in Lebanon started. Um, when I heard about it, I was in the youth hostel in New York when someone said, "Hey, your country is in war with Lebanon." So I went to a payphone and I called my parents, and my mom said, "Yeah, someone came with a Tzav Shmone. Summon 8 is the summon that reserve duty soldiers get to report to war." Um, I knew that my backpacking trip is over, and so I contacted a travel agent the next day to see if I can change the airline tickets. I did, and I flew that same evening, the next day, but in the evening, back to Israel. Um, Dropped the backpack and sleeping bag at my parents' house and reported to the unit. And I think I was 2.5 months in Lebanon, which may seem like a lot, but when I think about my two brothers, my youngest brother served 18 months in Lebanon, and my other brother 5. So 2.5 months didn't seem like a lot. But something happened also in Lebanon that kind of impacted me in a way, and sometimes I think about it. My unit was mostly in Marjayoun. It's part of Lebanon, and the Bekaa Valley, um, hotbed for terrorists at the time and for Hezbollah today. Um, and I remember one night um, we were moving into a village when we knew there were terrorists. So most of us were on foot, moving at night, and very few of us were moving or driving the armored vehicles into town. Um, and as we were approaching that village near Marjayoun, um, one of those armored vehicles took a direct hit from an RPG, a favorite rotor propelled grenade, shoulder launching grenade that terrorists carry. Um, and the ammunition inside exploded, which killed the driver, my friend Eli. I spoke with him literally just before he got on that armored vehicle and I got into my line and we started moving on foot and he drives. He drove. Um, I was not at his funeral because I was still in Lebanon, but I was told that not much was left of him. Although amazingly, his dog tag was completely intact, I was told. And so they buried the dog tag together with whatever was left of his body. Um, Actually, now that I think about it, I've never visited his grave. Um, I don't even know where he's buried, to be honest. I'm sure if I knew it at one time, I've forgotten. It's one of the benefit of not thinking and rehashing and dealing with stuff that happens in the past. It kind of stays in the past. Sadly, as I said, the establishment of Israel cost a lot of blood, life and limbs, people that were injured, body and soul, and people that obviously paid the ultimate price. But it doesn't end. I mean, tonight we're going to celebrate Israel's 76th birthday, and Israel is in the midst of a war, and probably soon about to start another one against Hezbollah in Lebanon. There are almost 200,000 Israelis that live on the north part of Israel that have not stayed in their home since October 7th because Hezbollah keep shelling and rocketing and sending drones full of explosives. So even right now as we speak, my sister's two grandsons are in the military. Many of my cousins' children are in the military and involved in the war in Gaza and reserve duty or regular service duty. One of my cousin's daughter was right on the border of Gaza, one of those people that watch the fence with the cameras and report anybody that get close and all this. And thank God she survived. And so if it's okay with you, I'd like to end this presentation and leave some time for questions. But I want to end this presentation with a prayer for the Israeli soldiers. A prayer for the welfare of the soldiers of the Israeli Defense Forces. It's not the official translation. I took it from Hebrew and translated, but I think it's pretty close to what might be the original translation of or at least the formal translation. May God who blessed our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and our mothers, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless the soldiers of the Israeli Defense Forces who keep guard over the Jewish homeland and its cities, from the border with Lebanon to the Egyptian desert, and from the Mediterranean Sea to the approach of the Arava, be they on land, air, or sea. May the Almighty deliver them our enemies who arise against us. May the Holy One, blessed be He, preserve them and save them from all sorrow and peril, from danger and ill. May God send blessing and success in all their worthy endeavors. May God crown them with salvation and victory, so that the saying may be fulfilled through them. Quote, for the Lord your God, who walks with you to fight your enemies for you and to save you. And let us say, Amen. May the memory of all of those soldiers that gave their life in the defense of the state of Israel, our Jewish homeland, and the life of all of those victims of terror be a blessing to their families, to the entire state of Israel, and to all of us and the Jewish people. Thank you very much for your time and for listening. I'm happy to answer questions.
Mike, I just want to say a few things, a few reflections on your beautiful presentation. I remember when you first spoke about your story at CBI, and that was monumental for the congregation, and you could hear a pin drop in that room, and I've never forgotten it, till this day, and it was so powerful to hear it again, and of course with a different slant and in a different time. So I just want to say thank you, and I'm grateful that all the people that joined us today and the people that will watch our recording later will have a chance to share in your story. Does anybody have any, thoughts or questions or reflections or other things to share with us, Linda? And I think you're on mute. So.
Again, I just want to thank Rabbi Mike for sharing such a deep and personal experience regarding this information and regarding this holiday. One thought that I had is that I hope and pray that you can take comfort in knowing that your friend Eitan, yours was the last face that he saw. And I hope that you know that he is probably watching over you right now, smiling from above. It's my prayer anyway.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you. I appreciate the kind words.
Yeah, I'd like to say that you're telling us in a beautiful way of your experience and the impact on the rest of your life and those around you, and that the telling is brings back the memory of those who sacrificed, their lives. And I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
One of the things, Mike, I'm wondering if in the time we have left, what I'd be so interested in you sharing is maybe different memories of different Yemei Ha'atzmaut that you've experienced, you know, um, one of your favorite, of the happiest story or one of the happiest, and maybe one that was so, of course, juxtaposed at a difficult time, and how, I mean, because again, that's another personal tale that you can reflect that we wouldn't necessarily know.
No, thank you. It's a great question, comment. Israel is so small. It's hard for us here in the country that has 350 plus million people to comprehend how small it is. But you will be hard pressed to find any family or friendship in Israel that did not experience death of a soldier or a relative, a victim of terror. So what jumps to mind is a cousin of mine that was killed in Lebanon. And I remember that the first year, the Yom Hazikaron, that kind of all of us, uncle and cousins, I think 3 of their grandparents were still alive, coming. And it was so strange in a way, by design, that you are at the cemetery at the afternoon and crying and praying, saying Kaddish. Then everybody comes to the house of his parents, uncle and aunt, and sharing a meal and talking and sharing stories. And a couple of hours later, it's Yom Ha'atzmaut. So there's a complete shift, 180 degrees. And you go from the sadness and the tears and the agony to celebration. And I remember it was so surreal for me to just think how a couple of hours ago, 3 hours ago, we were mourning and reflecting and remembering. And then here we are watching performance, singers on stage, eating cotton candy, which I always liked, both as a child, as an adult. There was always plenty of people selling cotton candy. And every city has, probably almost every city has a stage and an open space where all the people from the city comes and singers come, and it's a joy. There are performances and there's food galore, and it's just really a big celebration. Fireworks. And this was really when it was very close and personal, because up until that point, Yom HaZikaron meant sad music on the radio and sad programming on TV. And then when the sunset happens and the day was over, it's 25 minutes later that the day is over, the celebration begins. at this big center quad in the middle of town, where there are lights and stage with music and food concessions everywhere. It's a big happening. It's a concert. So really, this is the first time, both as a young man and not necessarily as a child, experiencing this transition from the sad that we are right now dealing with and going into. It's 10:17 right now on my clock, and in Israel, it's 8:17 p.m. So right now, the same people that an hour ago were mourning loved ones, literally forced to celebrate the independence of Israel. It was paid with too much blood and too much agony and too much sadness not to celebrate. We need to keep living. That's what the rabbis teach us. The Torah tells us to choose life. And that's how we do it. We don't forget. We remember. We are religion of collective memories, right? There were those that experienced the Holocaust and survived and probably saw the establishment of the state of Israel. They experienced it firsthand, and we, listening to their stories, live that memory. And now we are experiencing certain things in our lifetime. And one day, our children and grandchildren and the younger generation will hear those stories. It's a collective memory. And they will have that memory. They'll share that memory. That's what we're doing. Thank you for that, Rabbi Gilchin.
Thank you, Mike. I believe Sandra has a question.
Sure.
I don't have so much as a question as I want to thank you so much for your.
Sandra, you are muted. Sandra, you are muted, but.
Yes, that was my doing. Sandra.
Okay. Thank you. Too much stuff on my iPad going on here. I just wanted to thank you so much for your moving story. It was truly inspiring. But one of these days, on a different note, I would love to hear how you transitioned from aerospace to the rabbinate. So for another time, maybe another teaching. And I just want to say thank you again.
You're quite welcome. Thank you. And yes, I'd be happy to tell you about the transition on some other occasion. Let's keep our eyes on the ball and focus on what. But we see each other nightly during the minyan, so I'd be happy to talk about this as well.
Hi. I wanted to say thank you. It really gives a human dimension to the war as it exists. The other thing is that I worked on Hellfire and on Longbow, and I'm so glad that you were able to use them for an unambiguously moral purpose. It was something I was concerned about while I was working, but thank you for taking what we did and putting it into the field. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hellfire that Jonathan was referring to is a rocket usually shot from drones, usually nowadays from drones. It could save a lot of lives because you don't have to face the terrorist that's hiding behind a wall, but rather a Hellfire missile can take care of that for you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
That's amazing, actually. Connection.
Yeah, warfare today is very different because there are eyes in the skies. I'm not talking about satellite, about drones that are flying around, and they literally in front of the troops, the ground forces. So they know what's around the corner, and they know what's on the other side of the hill, and they know because of infrared detections and other sophisticated electronics where enemies are, and they literally can, like a linebacker in football, clear the path for the runner to run. They will be in front of you, clearing the path so the infantry can advance, whether on foot, in tanks, armored vehicle, whatever the case might be. The war that the Israeli Defense Forces is fighting now, if you watch, especially the early part, the Israeli media is very different. It's very modern technology where literally somebody sitting in an office 100 miles away with a joystick and controlling drones that are circling ahead of troops and clearing the path for them by killing terrorists that are sitting in ambush on the other side of the hill or behind the walls, etc. Whether it's day or night makes no difference. Infrared will see them at night. And during the day, the cameras will see them. I didn't know about that. I didn't know about this element of your background, Jonathan, but I'm happy to hear it. So thank you very much for it. Thank you, Bonnie. I appreciate the kind words. Cantor Asher Tilchin, it's good to see you again. You can never have enough of a good thing, so I'm glad to see you as we did last time, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. Very, very moved.
Thank you very much.
So, yeah, it was so special. Just like I dreamed when I was thinking, Mike, that you would teach us today. I've known Rabbi Mymon a long time, and I'm used to calling him Mike. I'm sorry about that. There's no sign of disrespect, just sort of it's a reflex. Rabbi Mymon will be back with us this summer. I'm putting together the ALI summer schedule. Rabbi Daniel Levine will be with us, possibly Rabbi Mike Gilboa, Rabbi Sarah Basson. We have some really interesting teachers with us. So you will see him again. And I hope that those of you who are, his followers from Congregation Shalom and some of the people who've joined from the Mymon will also be able to join us for some other really thoughtful learning that happens every week. Next week, Rabbi David Lazar, who right now is in Israel with his daughters and his grandchildren, with his children and grandchildren, is going to share another personal account. He lived there for many years, and he was a rabbi there, and he raised his family there. And, I only imagine that to go back to Israel today, after not living there, sort of boots on the ground for the last few years, you have a different perspective than when you're sort of in it moment by moment. And so we're calling it, live and up close from Israel. And there will be no ALI on Memorial Day, and we'll begin with a whole new series in June, and that will be coming out. But in honor of all the people that have dedicated their lives to the creation, the safety and security of the state of Israel, we honor them this morning. And Mike, you have helped us do that. And may each of us in our own way feel a sense of celebration for the fact that in our lifetimes, there has been a state of Israel that not only we could visit and enjoy, but that has really been a light unto the world in so many ways. And I just pray that it continues to be so in safety and as a place where every Jewish person and every interested person can feel welcome and embraced and inspired, because that's what it's been up until this point. So I want to wish you all a meaningful day, and we'll see you next week, God willing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. And thank you for
Rabbi Mike.
Yes.
It seems to me that since we've had you involved in these lessons and in our congregation, it makes it more interesting every week. When I used to go to services, I would